Howdy friends, this is the Roaming Prepper channel. I'm your host Pete, and thank you for joining me today. For those of you who are new, I do cover things ranging from preparedness to cooking to food prep to firearms, and I love my geopolitics, and a lot of it is pure hypothesis, which this is. Setting that tone up front, this is purely a hypothesis on my part. So, believe it or not, I'll get into the story right now. Believe it or not, it's been nearly a quarter of a century since 9/11 happened. It was 2001, we're 2025, right? So, we're just shy of a quarter century since the 9/11 attacks. Shortly after the 9/11 attacks, while America was recovering, and there's a lot of conspiracy and theories, legitimate theories about how that happened, how it was allowed to happen and whatnot. I'm not getting into that. I'm simply stating that after that point in time, there was a big shift in American foreign policy. And one of them, and Don Rumsfeld, I believe it was Rumsfeld, it may have been someone else, actually said it, and the video's out there if you look for it. There were 6 or 7 countries that the leaders of both parties and the White House and the Congress agreed we needed to overturn the governments of these places for whatever reason. These were not countries, these were all countries in the Middle East, none of whom were technically our allies per se. Among them were Syria, Libya, Sudan, Iran, and Iraq. And there were a couple others that escaped me at the moment. We're now 25 years, almost a quarter century, as I said, into this global war on terror and this whole kerfuffle. And every one of those countries, as of say up until the last few months, every one of those countries has had their government overturned except for 2, Syria and Iran. And Syria has been involved in a civil war for years, largely sponsored by the Americans. So if you've been paying any attention, you have Russian, Chinese, American, NATO, all sorts of different Iranian military units in the western part of Syria fighting back and forth. Americans and Western powers allegedly assisting the rebels, and so on and so forth. And it's very convoluted because ISIS is fighting Al-Qaeda and Taliban are in there, and they're all fighting each other, and we're fighting with them. And anyway, I don't have that knowledge base, but what I do understand is the larger macro picture. Syria and Iran were the remaining 2 countries that still had the original governments that were still in place during the 9/11 attacks. I'm wondering why the Ukraine war started in the first place. Like, why was NATO antagonizing Russia through Ukraine, or why was Russia screwing with Ukraine in the first place? Depending on how you look at it, the war doesn't make a hell of a lot of sense. The Ukrainians and Russians are culturally and religiously very close together. The war seems to be just a meat grinder of equipment and people and money. And yeah, there's a lot of people hypothesizing that the industrial congressional military production complex has their hands in it. I'm absolutely sure they do, because I think those kind of companies everywhere have their hands in this. That aside, strategically, what the hell are we doing there? Like, if you look at where the front lines are today versus where they were when Ukraine was originally attacked by Russia, they really haven't changed that much. There's still this Donbass region they're fighting over. Russia made inroads, got repelled by the Ukrainians, and then it's just been a stalemate pretty much. It's just this big grinding war, which makes no sense to anyone. However, what this war did, and how does this tie to the Middle East? Well, what this war did was put a strain on Russia's military. Russia had to recall the Wagner group from Africa and had to recall a lot of equipment and personnel from various parts of the world to fight in Europe. One of those countries, which was heavily relying on Russian help, was Syria. Now, Iran does too, but Iran has a pretty robust military in and of itself. But Syria was heavily relying on Russian air support and special forces. With the war in Ukraine dragging on, I don't doubt a lot of those assets have been pulled for Russia to deal with their other problem. And I hypothesize that since the Ukraine war broke out, the rebels in Syria have made steady gains against the incumbent government, President Assad's government, And as of this weekend, it appears that they've run him off. He's been ousted along with his leadership. And now there's no government in Syria. It's now factions fighting, and ultimately someone will come out on top, who I'm sure the United States or somebody is going to make a deal with to keep the peace. So was the Ukraine war in general, overall, purely instigated to force Russia to pull its units out and fight a war somewhere else in a true proxy manner so that the allies of the West could overthrow Assad? And if so, was the attack on Israel starting the same situation against Iran? How can the Mossad get bombs and hundreds, if not thousands, of beepers and walkie-talkies and blew up Hezbollah guys in their own damn kitchens and toilets, but they missed this big massive attack of paragliders coming over their fences? There's no way, unless Israel took the sacrifice hit, knowing full well it would drag Iran into a two-front war with Hezbollah and Hamas and Israel, and ultimately weaken Iran to the point of overthrowing them as well. Because right now, with Assad gone, Iran is the only one of those countries named by Rumsfeld, Bush, and Schumer and all those leaders back at 9/11 who's still in power. That's the only government left. We've flipped all those other countries. So is the war in Ukraine and the subsequent attacks on Israel part of a larger plan to force Russia and China to put their assets somewhere else so we could topple the last two governments that we were targeting in the Middle East, which were Syria and Iran? Something to think about. And then the bigger picture is, why topple those two? What was the end game there? And are we getting dragged into something much, much bigger that none of us is seeing right now? Which I don't doubt, but I can't put my finger on it. In any case, folks, that's it I got for this one. Something for y'all to think about. Until next time, God bless, Godspeed. Pay attention to the chess pieces being moved around. I fear it can be used to drag us into something that we don't want in the next few years. And if so, you need to be ready: food, meds, water, etc. Because if it drags us into fights with governments like Iran, North Korea, and subsequently China and Russia, they can hit us here. It's not going to be a foreign war. It's going to be in our streets. It's going to be in our cybersecurity. It's going to be in our water supply or supermarkets, whatever. Be ready for that. You guys take care. Stay frosty, and we'll see you later.